Welcome everyone. We'll give everyone just a few more seconds here before we get started. We've got 30 minutes for this webinar. We'll stick to those 30 minutes. It's nice to see some familiar faces from all over the world. Yeah, good to see you all. Okay, well, hello, and thank you for joining us today for a very special HeartMath webinar. My name is Harper Wagner. I'm a certified HeartMath trainer and serve as the Director of Business Transformation at YRCI, an organization that enables government efficiency with human capital and digital solutions, and the sponsor for this event. I'm very grateful to have Dr. Rollin McCraty, the Director of Research at the HeartMath Institute, joining me for this webinar. A bit of logistics before we get started. We've disabled your mics and opened up the chat. Please keep the chat on topic and focused for this session. This will help us maintain a coherent space. And if you have any questions related to HeartMath, please drop them in the chat and I'll follow up with you by tomorrow end of day. Ideally, you are stationary during the session so you can minimize distractions both for yourself and for your participants, the fellow participants, and will also enable you to direct your full attention to the practices. I will first lead us through a quick yet effective centering technique called heart focused breathing, then hand off to Roland for an introduction to the science of the heart. He'll then lead us through another heart focused practice before we close out at 1:30. So let's get started with heart focused breathing. It's a simple technique to help center yourself when you're feeling stressed or any other depleting emotion, such as worry, frustration, or anger. This technique could be practiced with your eyes open or closed. And I'll first share the steps and then we'll practice together. So step one of heart-focused breathing is to focus your attention in the area of the heart. It may be helpful to place your hand on your chest when you're doing this to help draw your attention to the area of the heart. The second step is to imagine your breath flowing in and out of your heart or chest area, breathing a little slower and deeper than usual. Find an easy rhythm that's comfortable. It may be helpful if you're having a hard time figuring out that pace is 4 to 6 seconds out, 4 to 6 seconds in. And that's usually there if you can do it. That's the type of rhythm we're looking for. So let's now practice. Feel free to turn your camera off if you prefer. Again, this can be done eyes open or closed. May be helpful for the first time practices to close your eyes. So focus your attention in the area of the heart. Imagine your breath is flowing in and out of your heart or chest area, breathing a little slower and deeper than usual. Find an easy rhythm that's comfortable. If your mind wanders, you can bring it back to your breath, to your heart. And notice what you experienced. You're invited to briefly share in the chat about your experience. And I will now hand it over to Roland.
Thanks, Harper. So Harper asked me to do just a few minutes on some of the very basic heart-brain science research that we've done. And to kind of start with, I know we don't have a lot of cameras on, but I was just going to ask how many of you are experiencing maybe increased stress these days or a lot of stress in your life? A few hands going up, yeah. Um, we don't often think about it, but what underlies stress is always an emotion. It used to be that the number one, what's called stressor, the thing out there in the world that's causing our internal reaction, was actually time pressure, which is defined as the feeling that we don't have enough time, right? Or the feeling that everything's taking too long, an emotion. These days, some of the surveys are saying, well, time pressure is still way up there, right? And work-related stress is usually a bit high up in the source of stress. But dealing with difficult people has kind of emerged now as often the number one source of stress for people. Anybody can relate to that? Is that, yes, a few of you? Interesting how things are shifting. But the point here is that um, what we call stress is always an emotion. It's a feeling. It's the frustration, the impatience, the feeling of overwhelm, etc. And that's important because it's those emotions that we feel a lot of times under the radar, so to speak, because they become so familiar with them, they don't even perceive them anymore. But it's emotions that really run the show in terms of what goes in our body, inside of our body, hormonal flows, the activity in our brain and nervous system. This is all driven by emotion. Yes, thoughts can change thought physiology, and easy to prove this here in the lab. We can have you wired up to all the stuff, right, and have you thinking and subtractions and all this stuff. And yeah, you can measure some changes, but once you start feeling embarrassed, say because you can't do the subtractions well, or and excuse me, or frustrated about it, big changes happen quick. Blood pressure, hormonal flows, all that rapidly shifts. So, just a fun little example of it, show you here next is this. We do a lot of recording of what's called heart rate variability, heart rhythms. So I'm going to show you next, actually a husband who's in a car, seat belted in. If we can go to the next, yeah, there we go. Um, so you can see his heart rate over on the left, around um, kind of normal heart rate, 60, 70 in there. And then just right out of his log, keeping track. So this is a passenger, right? Seat belted in the car, no physical activity. When him and his wife started having an argument, you can see his heart rate's up at around 140 for a good half hour there, sitting still. I happen to know who this person is, and I promise you they couldn't maintain this high heart rate this long through physical exercise if they had to. So just you see the power of emotion here. Then a little bit later on, they kind of made up, "I'm okay, you're okay," but his heart rate's still up there around 100, and that actually continued. It was another hour or so before it finally settled down. Now you think about how much energy just got burned, from that emotional reaction there. So that's just one of a gazillion examples I could show you of the power of emotions to drive our physiology. Now, one of the things that, from the research perspective, that's emerged in recent years is the understanding that to really, well, even be awake and conscious, but certainly to perform well, to think clearly, clear the mental fog, have more energy at the end of the day, these types of things, really gets down to how synchronized is the activity in our brain and nervous system, right? So, are we in sync, out of sync? It really gets that kind of simple. So, it's the well, I'll come to this later and how the brain does this, but that's really what we're looking for is how do we get more in sync in terms of our physiology, which then underlies our ability to think better, make better decisions, better memory, better performance in sports. The list goes on. So it turns out the key to synchronization has to do, like quite literally, with the activity of the heart and the communication between the heart and brain. Now, the on this slide you're seeing here, I know there's a lot of info on it. Sorry about that. But the second bullet on there, the heart sends far more information to the brain than the brain to the heart. That may sound like some big new discovery. No, been known since the late 1800s. This is basic neuroanatomy. This are largely forgotten and ignored until recent years. This uh, this story started changing back actually in around the 1970s when it was discovered that I'll say quality, but the neural activity the heart was sending to the brain had profound effects on brain function. It was modulating our perceptions, how we see the world, how going directly into the parts of the brain that are involved in emotional states. So, in other words, the activity of the neural patterns of the heart was telling the brain what we feel, right? I mean, after all, I doubt if any of you said "I love you" with all of my brain, right? When you fell in love with someone, probably wouldn't go over very well, right? Because we intuitively know there's something about the heart that's more to do with that. But then the top statement on that slide, what it was talking about is we now know that the heart actually does have its own now been nicknamed the heart brain, and this comes from the field called neurocardiology. So the heart literally has its own functional brain. I won't go a lot more into that. Now, most people know what heart rate is, right? How many times does a heart beat in a minute? But in reality, in a healthy person, our heart rate changes with each and every heartbeat. So the time intervals between every pair of heartbeats is always varying and changing. And that's what's called heart rate variability. That's become a lot more popular these days. A lot of people have heard of it because all the fitness trackers tend to measure that now. So this is the heart rate variability you're seeing here. This is the beat to beat change in heart rate. And these two images you're seeing are from the same person. On the left, where it says incoherence at the top, this is what our heart rhythm looks like when we're experiencing things like frustration or impatience or anxiety, worry, anger, way worse. This chaotic looking pattern that you see. That's what our heart rhythm looks like. And that is actually reflecting desynchronization in the neural activity in our brain and nervous system. It's a direct measure of that, a direct reflection of that. And a term was coined back in the 70s to describe the effect this type of desynchronized state has on our brain function. It's called cortical inhibition. Cortex, the top part of our brain, right? What's what we get paid to go to work for, is inhibited. Okay. A graph on the right, same person, actually in this case, just a few moments later. This is what our heart rhythm looks like when we're feeling things like kindness, appreciation, patience, calmness, inner stillness, right? You can't think your way into this. It actually is you have to feel it. So we would naturally be in this what we call coherent rhythm. You know, one of those. It could just be as simple as you walk out the door and a beautiful day out, right? You just go, oh God, what a beautiful day. Probably feeling that kind of awe or appreciation, even though you may not think that. Your heart rhythm is shifted into this. Now we now know optimal state of coherence because that's the rhythm that is called cortical facilitation. So it enhances brain function. Okay. And now, also important to know that that coherent state is not the same thing as relaxation. Okay, they're quite distinct physiological states. So coherence is really reflecting deeper synchronization. In fact, here's an example. Here you're looking on top, the breathing rhythm, the heart rhythm in the middle, and blood pressure rhythm, which also changes beat to beat on the bottom. The dotted line, where somebody used a coherence technique, very much like what Harper led us through in the beginning. And then if we go to the next slide, you can see the visual. This is showing us that the frequencies of those rhythms have, when we're in that coherent state, on the right side, see all the little peaks are all exactly at the same frequency. All of those internal rhythms have now synchronized. So this is an state of optimal internal efficiency. You're not using as much energy to get a lot more done. So this, I mean, we literally measurably are in sync here. There's a lot more levels of synchronization that go on when we get into this natural resonant state of coherence. Okay, so the way this works, even though it took a long time to sort this all out, but different labs around the world, it's really pretty simple. There's a very core of our brain, part of the brain's called the thalamus. It has a lot of jobs and roles that it does, but it's the part of the brain that actually is responsible for synchronizing all the neurons globally in the brain. It's got all these neural loops that do this. So there's a direct neural input from the heart directly to the thalamus. So when we're in that incoherent heart rhythm state, it's basically that's the signal going right to the thalamus, and it basically interferes with its capacity to synchronize global neural activity in the brain, hence cortical um, uh, inhibition. Affects all the brain centers, reaction times, coordination, these kinds of things. But even more important than all that is the frontal part of the brain, the frontal cortex. Now, what that part of the brain gives us, right, in terms of brain function, is the capacity of foresight. Okay, so foresight's a big deal, right? The ability to understand how our behaviors and so on are going to affect the future. Not a good idea to yell at the boss if you want to keep your job, right? Or eat that second helping if you're on a diet and so on. So it's really the capacity to self-regulate, to be in charge of our own internal reactions to the world that's going on outside. Goal setting, planning, um, feeling like feeling accomplishment when you complete a goal. It's all under foresight, abstract thinking. So the neural structures that give us those capacities when they're out of sync are taken offline, right? Not that anybody here has ever done this, but you might know people that when they get a little mad or emotionally upset, they do stupid things, right? Or they say something they didn't mean to someone. You know, you have that reactions. Classic examples of cortical inhibition. On the other hand, if you're able to shift into that heart coherent state, that's the rhythm now going to the thalamus and actually improves global neural synchronization above and beyond our normal walking around state. So now we're making better choices, better decisions, faster reaction times, and so on. You can remember where you put your car keys, these kinds of things. So fairly simple to understand the mechanism, even though it's kind of hard to sort it out. Now, there are actually now over 500 independent research studies that have looked at what happens when people learn these skills and start practicing coherence, right? Before they have a phone call, before during meetings, etc., before taking tests. You know, how do we navigate life for more coherence? And we do a lot of work in law enforcement, first responders. In fact, we were honored to say developed the resilience program for the U.S. Navy. And in those kind of contexts, one of the biggest capacities is that people gain in skills is how do you maintain your composure, you know, in the middle of the chaos that's going on around you, right? A lot of that going on these days. So that's a really important skill. Um, you know, the harmony within work teams and sports teams and so on, performance. Um, you have a lot more vitality, less fatigued and exhausted at the end of the day. Many studies in the healthcare clinical context, you know, whether it's high blood pressure, diabetes, heart failure, all these kinds of studies, is when you're in that coherent state, you're not using that energy, that stress energy that's really depleting us, but now that same energy can help facilitate the body's ability to heal itself, for example. Um, Better thinking more clearly, productivity, uh, finding solutions. Again, there's hundreds of studies on all these things. Okay, so when and one of the reasons that you is what we call this carryover effect. So if you think about it, even if you just take a minute to get into coherence, you're stabilizing the activity in the brain and nervous system, getting in sync, and then that leads to a lot of hormonal and biochemical changes that then have a carryover effect that takes us into that next activity, whether it's a meeting, a phone call, whatever, where we're more in that centered, coherent state. Okay. All right. So, um, in practical sense, here's an example of kind of because this is really about how we navigate day-to-day life with more grace, like less stress. Now, here's actually another one of those real-world recordings we do of somebody who'd been practicing these skills, and they got frustrated. I mean, it happens, right? I mean, it's not like we're going to walk through life and never get, you know, upset or frustrated. You know, so the kind of the red area there on the slide is where it's right out of her log. She got really frustrated with one of her coworkers, but remembered, oh, I can use this coherence skill. In this case, it was just simply hard focused breathing. That's the first step of a lot of more advanced techniques, and shifted into coherence. You see it right there in green. And I was able to re-engage, you know, and kind of maintain her balance then through that next thing, that next part of her activity, but from a more calm, composed perspective, right? So this is really about how do we, moment to moment, you know, through our day-to-day lives, really keep that more inner balanced at a physiological and middle and emotional state level. So that's it. I know there's a lot more to this, but I thought I'd just give you a very brief and basic kind of understanding of how the heart and brain interact. So Harper, what do we want to do another technique or?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we can bring this slide back, and then Roland's going to lead us through another heart focused or heart centered practice. We get some more experience with the practices because the science is amazing, very insightful, and really it's the practices that help us to anchor this experience of coherence in. So, Roland, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Harper. Well, we're going to start again with the same step one of most of the techniques are heart focused breathing that Harper already led us through. So let's do this together. You want to focus your attention in the area of the heart, basically right here in the center of the chest, and imagine your breath is flowing in and out of your heart or chest area, breathing a little slower and deeper than usual. But find that rhythm that's comfortable, that slower, deeper rhythm that's a comfortable rhythm for you. And just and a lot of people with practice find they actually can feel almost like a breath, an energetic flow coming in and out of the heart area. Now, as you maintain doing the heart focused breathing, activate a feeling of kindness. It could be kindness, it could be appreciation, it could be care for someone, someplace. It could be an attitude of a genuine connection for someone. Or you might, if you need to, you could just breathe a feeling of inner stillness. This is an important next step because the breathing will help bring balance into the nervous system. But if we don't activate that regenerative emotion, that's what starts shifting the hormonal systems and these deeper states of inner peace and inner coherence. Now, if that's tough to do, because right off the beginning, you can maybe, um, if you have a pet, how do you feel when you come home and your pet greets you? Right? Just breathe that feeling. Or maybe there's a special place in nature that you love to go, right? But what's the feeling that you have when you're there? Breathe that feeling. And so this is one of the simpler heart math techniques that we have, but it's again, as Harper said, this is something you can do anytime, anywhere. You can have your eyes open. You can do it while you're driving. You can do it when you're in a meeting, on a phone call, or a Zoom meeting. The harder part is remembering to do it. Right? But you have to breathe anyway, right? So we're not asking you to take a lot of time out of your day. It's more just becoming more conscious of our internal environment, right? So if you're feeling maybe anxiety or overwhelm, just start doing heart focused breathing and breathing in that feeling of maybe inner peace or inner stillness, whatever is appropriate for the situation. Okay, Harper, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Roland. We've got a couple extra minutes here. The what was coming up for me was uh, the you mentioned the neural network, the heart brain, and I remember in the trainings, and I often share this in the workshops about how much information is going from the heart to the brain compared to the other way around, and why we need to go to the heart to be able to shift our state. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, the heart brain, that was a nickname coined by the researchers in the field of neurocardiology. But then there's neurocardiology centers all around the world now. That's profoundly affected a lot of the way heart surgeries are done and things, this understanding. But the primary nerves that connect the heart and brain, well, all the internal organs in the body, basically, it's called the vagus nerves. There's two of them. These are very large. It's the longest nerve in the body. It comes down through the front of the body. And there are thousands of neural fibers in each one of the two vagus nerves. 90% of those neural fibers are carrying information from the body back to the brain. And the majority of those 90% are quite literally coming from the heart and cardiovascular system. So for years, a lot of people have been focused on the 10% going down, right? Kind of ignoring the 90% and all the profound effects that's going on of how the body's affecting the brain, more specifically the heart, because the heart's the primary source of rhythm in the body. I mean, it's the only true pacemaker system in the body. So it's really, you can think of it as the conductor of all the orchestra of everything that's going on. And then we can go to the electrical domain. And so when you put electrodes on to measure the electrocardiogram, right? You can measure that signal on your toe, right? Anywhere on the body, because it's the. I just talked here today about how the neural signals from the heart are synchronizing one aspect of the brain, but actually the rhythm of the heart is the conductor of all the cells in the body, and keeping those things in sync, and kind of the global information synchronizer in the whole body. So uh, I can you have to be careful here, Harper. I can talk
I
for
know.
hours.
No, I know. I appreciate that about you. It's a wealth of information. And that's just really nails home the importance of going to the heart, right? And getting out of the mind, focusing on the heart and focusing in on the breath coming out. And that's how simple these techniques are, right? And that's really for me the simplicity, but the power of the heart math techniques is just that. The mind keeping the story going that creates the stress. And I've been practicing this today. um,
If I may, Harper,
yeah, of
something that
course.
can be very helpful in learning these skills is there's actually now very inexpensive or in some case free apps that let you see your own heart rhythm and measure and reflect how coherent your rhythm is or not. Um, uh, the Global Coherence app is one that we use in teams to get to team in coherence together. There's also the HeartMath app, which is called HeartMath app, that you can actually use your phone's camera as the sensor for your pulse to get your heart rate variability. So there's check
Yeah.
those out if you want to try this yourself and actually play with how your emotions affect your heart rhythm and be a self scientist. Um,
Mm. I appreciate the work that the HeartMath Institute has done. And there's lots of great resources out there. Samantha, if you can bring up that last slide with the resources, we'll start closing out. Thank you, Roland. Appreciate you joining us and sharing a little bit about the science of the heart, as well as guiding us through that heart centered practice. These resources, heartmath.org, the website has lots of free resources out there with some specifically to help manage stress. There's links to the research studies as well, oodles of resources that are there. You can spend days going through that, I think. If you have any questions about the practices and content of this webinar or how to introduce HeartMath to organizations, you reach out to me, hwagner at yrci.com, as well as if you have any questions for Roland, I'll be sure to get those to him specifically, if that's something that you're interested in. If you're looking for a certified HeartMath trainer across the globe, certified.heartmath.com/directory. That'll get you there. I'm happy to share those. Just email me if you have any questions, need anything again. But that's it for our webinar. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Really
yeah.
appreciate it. And thank you, Roland, again. Thank you, Samantha, for your help. And thank you, YRCI, for sponsoring this event. Wishing you all well.